I'm Cyrus Chestnut, and I rock jazz. Well, for me, the church was and in many ways is a great training ground. I think it's an unspoken, one of those unspoken schools, such as the Betty Carter School and how the Buhena School was. It took me a long time to remember, to kind of reflect, as I reflect back on it. The church taught me ear training. The church taught me how to improvise. It taught me principles of accompaniment. And to explain it, growing up, they would have a portion of services called testimony, this testimony period, where people would tell stories about how the good Lord has been good to them, and they would either let's say a few words, sing a song, pray a prayer, whichever, And some people would sing, and they would never tell you what song they were going to sing, nor the key. So you had to, they used to start singing. And it was my job to figure out where they were and accompany them. And there was I had no option to say I couldn't do it, because I had to face the wrath of my father if I was going to do that. So, ear training. People were singing all 12 keys, sometimes in the quarter tones in between. They would modulate 2, 3, 4 times, sometimes just often, But you had to follow them. I didn't realize exactly how important that was. Being able to play in the cracks, accompanying someone, playing for the choirs, you have to accompany them. You couldn't overplay, you couldn't underplay, you had to give support. Even when the preacher was doing the last part of his sermon or the closing, they would get into the hoop where and then so they would say a phrase, and then I would be the musical amen or yes sir. So I had to be able to figure out what to play then. So all these things are very present right now. Working with vocalists who are just general modes of accompaniment. You listen. You had to listen in church. You had to listen. You had to use your ears. You had to listen. It wasn't about you. It was about what you could do to contribute to the whole. Later on, rather than I've felt as a necessity to include all of me in just being who I am. The great Betty Carter always said jazz is about finding out who you are. So if I'm going to be honest in being who I am, then there's that element from the church that it has to be present, not in a separate way, but in a collective way. So anything that I play could have elements of a hymn or some type of gospel tinge. I think about Ray Bryant. You listen to Ray Bryant play. Although he didn't necessarily play gospel specific, but you heard the church in him. And when you talked to Ray Bryant, he said his mom was a great gospel pianist, and she taught him how to play. So there's that flavor that was handed down to him, and he played honestly. And so all I have to say is that if I'm going to be who I am, then all of that has to come forth. Embarrassing moment. I can take you back to Berklee College of Music with Betty Carter. It's my first meeting with Betty Carter. She was coming to do a master class, and I just remember seeing the posters and telling everybody about, I'm gonna sit in with Betty Carter and I'm gonna show her what I can do. She was playing at Symphony Hall down the street. There's a saying that goes, "Be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it." So I went to the master class and sat down, and it was very warm. And usually in warm climates, if I'm sitting down and the room is kind of hot, you know, my tendency is to go sleepy time down south. So I did go down south sleepy time. And I woke up and I heard a talk. It's like, okay. And someone got up and said, "We heard you talk. Now we want to hear you sing." So there's a whole performance center full of 1,200 people singing, "Yeah!" So I says, okay. And she looks around, and I believe at the time, Benny Green was her accompanist at the time. She was in the trio, I believe. Either Benny Green or Stephen Scott, I'm not sure. I stand corrected. She says, "My piano player is gone." Mark Ledford, bless his soul, jumped up. Mark Ledford, who called me, found me in a hotel in Harrisburg working in the top 40 band, got me to audition for John Hendricks. Mark Ledford, the same Mark Ledford, jumped up again, and he said, "Get Cyrus Chestnut!" And all of a sudden, terror went all from head to toe. And the thing about it was, and within seconds, the whole performance center of people was hollering, "Cyrus! Cyrus! Cyrus!" I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know if I can do this. Mark says, "This is your chance, man. Come on, you gotta do it." So I got up there. You know, I've heard heard known about Betty's reputation and how she can just eat piano players for lunch and brunch and all this. So I'm shaking. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm shaking. So I'm afraid she's gonna call a tune I didn't know. She's gonna embarrass me right there. All right, I get up, and she says, "Okay." The first thing she says to me is, "So you like jazz, huh?" And I said, Yeah. She says, "Okay, let's do something." So I said, "Wait." I said, "Okay." So she says, "Body and soul." And like the movie The Perfect Storm, when the sun comes out for a second, just before the sun, George Clooney's character looks at the sun, and I think Mark Wahlberg looks at him. His character says, "We're gonna make it, Cap." And he looks up. He says, "Oh, baby, we're not." So that sun, body and soul, was that sun. The storm was when she came to change the key. She changed the key on me. She changed it to G. And I'll tell you the exact way how she did it. I walked away, and just as Zorro would finish off his opponents with the Z, she said, "In G." And that G, I felt as if that she had a knife and she carved G right in my back. And I said, "Oh no." Larry Monroe was over in the wings, and he looked at me as I walked to the piano. It seemed like that was just the longest walk. He says, "You sure you got it? You sure you got it? You sure you got it? We don't have any real books here." And so I'm like, "I think I got it." I didn't have it. I knew the song in the key of D flat, but transpose it to the key of G, that A minor chord. It was like that A minor chord got a ticket to Fiji and flew away. So I'm not coming to find. I couldn't think of what the first chord was. And oh Lord, what was the first chord? So I get started. I'm playing it in the key of C. What was crazy about it, Betty actually was singing the changes to me. And as she was singing the changes, it's like, oh gosh, I was hearing, but I wasn't hearing. I was just so locked up. So after a while, she just looked and just started singing. So it got to the point where she sang, and it was a point of me where either I had to stop or fight through it. And there was something inside me that says, you ain't gonna be embarrassed around all these kids. You gonna fight through this here. So I fought through it. I fought through it. I fought through it. I fought through it. She was in the key of G. I was in the key of C. We made it through. Everybody, and the interesting thing about this particular story, I don't know, it was very embarrassing for me because here I am in a whole school of students, music students. People got good ears. Know that when she said she said G, they knew that the first chord was supposed to be the A minor 7 chord, but I was nowhere near there. I was like, oh Lord. So I walked over to her and I said, Miss Carter, I'm sorry. She gave me a hug. Says, you were wonderful. So I was like, what? And for some reason, I guess it seemed, I don't know whether the good Lord confused everybody's ear. But everybody thought I did wonderful. I was like, that was horrible. Right? I walked down the street, about 3 blocks on Hemingway Street, and it was like the A minor 7 chord decided that it had enough vacation, and it took the plane back, and then it went boom, so the light bulb had the light bulb switch. Boom! Oh man, the first chord is A minor 7. Oh! So I turned back around, went to the piano, played in the key. It's like, oh gosh. Oh, that was another great lesson. Nerves, you know. You can be very embarrassed, but then after a while you can't let nerves take over. You can't let nerves take over. You have to find a way how to harness that nervous energy and grab it and let it propel you forward rather than have it overtake you. Mind you, it was embarrassing for me because I thought I was supposed to have it together. It kind of taught me that I didn't. Even further back in Berkeley, arrogance for me is like a cancer. I cannot stand arrogance, and I can never think these days that I'm that guy or I have arrived. I went into Curtis Williams, a phenomenal musician there at Berkeley, asked me to sit in for him at the studio orchestra rehearsal one evening. And I went in there with a swagger like, I'm gonna show these cats what I can do. Yeah. And it required some reading and improvisation that I wasn't ready for. It was so bad to the point that Donnie Nolan, the instructor, had to sit down and play, and I had to sit down and watch him. I almost went out in tears. And it was that day I vowed that I would never let myself get that big-headed ever again. Because it's always something to learn. It's always something to learn. That in front of your peers. I couldn't even read eighth notes. I couldn't even solo over a dominant 7th chord. It's like, and I vowed myself that day, never. If I ever got to that point again, I would truly put the piano down.